Hello everyone, I am the storyteller, and today I am here to accompany you on your journey to sleep. Before we begin, relax, and don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now lie down, close your eyes, and let this story take you into a mystical space with the sound of raindrops in the background. The mansion loomed before me like a stone monster, cold and gloomy in the fading twilight. As I turned the key, a chill ran down my spine, not because of the cool autumn wind, but because of an indescribable feeling, as if I were about to enter another world. I told myself it was just nervousness. It wasn't every day I was tasked with looking after a vast, mysterious mansion that seemed to have come straight out of a Gothic novel. I pushed open the heavy oak door, the creaking sound echoing through the wide hallway, like an echo of the house itself. "Is anyone home?" I called out, but was met with silence, so quiet that the ticking of the old clock seemed to tell me, "You are alone here." Struggling to calm myself, I dragged my suitcase upstairs, the sound of my footsteps on the soft carpet almost drowning out my thoughts. The bedroom Mrs. Blackwood had given me was larger than my own apartment, with a 4-poster bed big enough to sleep 4 people. After packing my things, I couldn't resist my curiosity and began exploring every corner of the house before nightfall. Each room exuded an air of old-world luxury. A library filled from floor to ceiling with books, a music room with a dusty grand piano, and a sunroom filled with exotic plants transported me to another world of ancient times and faded charm. As night fell, I returned to the kitchen to prepare dinner. The modern appliances in the kitchen looked out of place in the ancient space. I ate in silence, the sound of forks scraping against plates adding to the quiet and somewhat creepy atmosphere. The first night I lay in the dark, listening to the house creak and groan around me, strange sounds I had never heard in my city apartment. At times I sat up with a start, my heart pounding, as if someone were silently watching me in the darkness. The next day, I worked remotely in the library, surprised by the stable Wi-Fi connection in the old house. In the evening, I decided to relax in the lion's paw bath, hoping to ease my worries. But as I sank into the warm water, I heard a loud bang, followed by the sound of heavy, slow footsteps approaching. I held my breath and listened, hoping it was just the house quieting down. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. With shaking hands, I got out of the tub, dressed quickly, and tiptoed to the bathroom door, listening. The footsteps had stopped, but now I heard a drawer being pulled open and closed. Someone was in the house, rummaging around for something. Panicked and anxious, I knew that tonight it wouldn't be easy to find peace in this mansion. I felt as if an invisible hand was squeezing my throat. The cell phone was in the bedroom, and the landline was downstairs. I was trapped. Think, Sarah, think. I glanced around the bathroom, desperately searching for something to defend myself with. My eyes fell on the heavy crystal soap dish. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. I took a deep breath and opened the bathroom door. The hallway was empty, but I could hear noises coming from one of the empty bedrooms. I tiptoed toward the stairs, holding my breath so as not to make a sound. But then a floorboard creaked under my feet. The sounds from the bedroom stopped. Heart pounding, I raced down the stairs, taking them 2 at a time. Behind me, heavy footsteps followed. I rushed to the front door but found it locked. In my panic, I couldn't remember which key belonged to the door. Suddenly, a cold hand touched my shoulder, turning me around. I swung the soap tray blindly, feeling it hit something solid. A pained groan rang out and the grip on my shoulder loosened. Without hesitation, I ran toward the kitchen, hoping to escape through the back door. The intruder's footsteps continued to echo behind me, getting closer. The kitchen was dark, save for the faint glow of the microwave clock. I stumbled across the kitchen, groping for the door. My hip hit the counter, forcing me to stifle a cry of pain. My hand hit the cool glass, the door. I fumbled for the handle, my sweaty palms making it slippery. I finally managed to turn it and ran outside. The cool night air rushed in, and the vast expanse of grass stretched out before me, surrounded by dark trees. I ran toward the woods, my bare feet stomping on the wet grass. As I reached the edge of the woods, I heard the back door swing open. "Stop!" a deep voice called out. urging me to run even faster into the darkness. Branches whipped at my face, roots threatened to trip me. I had only one thought: get out of here and find help. I don't know how long I ran. My chest was aching. My legs felt like lead, but fear kept me going. Finally, when I thought I couldn't run any further, I saw light through the leaves. A house. I ran towards it, my hope making me dizzy. But as I passed the trees, I froze when I realized this place was familiar. It was the mansion. In a panic, I ran in circles back here. I stood frozen, not knowing what to do next. Then I saw a car parked in the driveway, a police car. Safe. I rushed toward it, waving my arms desperately. "Help! Please, help!" I screamed. The front door of the mansion opened, and a policeman stepped out, followed by Mrs. Blackwood. "Oh, thank goodness!" cried Mrs. Blackwood, rushing over. "Sarah, are you all right? We were so worried about you." I stammered, trying to catch my breath. "There's someone in the house. He's after me." Mrs. Blackwood and the policeman exchanged a look. "Sarah," Mrs. Blackwood said gently, "there's no intruder. It's just Harold." "Harold?" I said, surprised. And then a man appeared in the doorway. He was tall and thin, with gray hair and a gentle face. A bruise was starting to appear on his cheek. "I'm so sorry I scared you," he said, his voice low and apologetic, the same voice that had sounded behind me in the woods. Mrs. Blackwood smiled gently. "This is my husband, Harold." He wasn't planning on coming back soon, but his business trip ended earlier than expected, and he wanted to surprise me, not knowing I'd asked you to look after the house. All the tension melted away, leaving me exhausted. Harold added sheepishly, "I was just looking for my reading glasses. I didn't want to wake you up." And so that terrible night turned out to be just a misunderstanding. But I will never forget that feeling, the feeling of a night of running away in the dark forest. We walked back to the house, with the policeman following silently behind us. I couldn't help but laugh. All the fear, the chase through the woods, it had all turned out to be a simple misunderstanding. But that night, as I lay in bed listening to the Blackwoods' noises, a small part of me couldn't help but wonder, if it wasn't Harold, what if it was a real intruder? I pulled the covers up higher, suddenly realizing that the mansion was large, dark, with many hidden corners for someone to hide in. That night, it took me a long time to fall asleep. That night, the silence of the Baker family home seemed to blend with the gentle rain outside the window. I never thought that an ordinary evening of babysitting could become a memory forever engraved in my mind. I sat alone in the living room, the soft yellow light spread out, painting quiet patches of light and dark on the wall. Lily, the little girl I looked after, was sleeping peacefully upstairs. Everything was quiet, except for the steady sound of the rain as if whispering secrets. Then suddenly from the basement, I heard a strange sound. It was like the hum of old machinery, getting louder and louder, as if it wanted to draw me in. At first, I thought it was just the house settling down, or their old heating system. But something seemed different. The sound wouldn't stop, it just made me more curious. I tried to ignore it, concentrating on my writing, but a feeling of anxiety crept into my every sense. Before I knew it, my feet had taken me to the basement door. My hand trembled slightly as I touched the cold doorknob. When I opened the door, a cold breeze blew up from the stairs as if that place was waiting for me, mysterious and full of danger. I crept down the stairs, where the dim light from the upper floors was gradually swallowed by darkness. The sound of machinery became clearer, coming from a distant corner of the basement. When I stood in front of a large bookcase, I realized the sound was coming from behind me. Something strange and faint filtered through the small gap in the bookcase, like a light whispering an invitation. The raindrops outside still fell steadily in rhythm with my heavy breathing in the eerily quiet atmosphere. I gently touched the bookshelf, my hand sliding along the cracks until I found a small indentation. I pressed it, and the shelf slowly opened, revealing a hidden door inside. The back room was small, like a secret room that only the bravest could find. Inside, I saw computer screens lining the walls, showing different scenes: the yard, the kitchen, Lily's bedroom, and places I had never seen before. Parking lots, offices, and other houses appeared on the screens, dimmed in an eerie blue light. In the center of the room was a large desk, littered with papers and photos. A laptop was open on the desk, lines of code running across the screen. Everything there had an air of strangeness and dread. I approached the table and saw photographs of Mr. Baker, but not the gentleman I knew. In these photographs, he was standing next to strangers, handing over large wads of cash. A sense of dread took my breath away. The photographs, the documents, were records of other people's lives. It was as if Mr. Baker was monitoring everything, every detail, every move. I was startled when I heard the sound of a car slamming outside, and the sound of the rain pouring down heavier than ever. I hurried out of the secret room, my hands shaking as I slid the bookshelf shut. I ran upstairs trying to act calm and sat back down on my laptop just as Mr. and Mrs. Baker walked in. They looked at me with questioning eyes. I took a deep breath, forced a smile, and told them about Lily's night, about how she slept soundly like every night. But then as soon as I got home, my phone rang with a text message from an unknown number. "We know about your survey last night. Come home at 2 p.m. alone. Otherwise, things will get difficult for your family." My whole body went cold. They knew. They knew I had been in that room. I sat on my bed, listening to the rain outside the window, feeling scared and watching. The piece of life I once knew was now more fragile than ever. That night, the rain still fell, but in my heart, everything had changed. My name is Sarah, 28-year-old graphic designer living in a small apartment with my cat Milo. I love unique pieces and often shop online for interesting accessories. It was late one night when I was browsing a local shopping website looking for something special, and then I saw it, a beautiful Art Deco necklace with an intricate silver pendant, sparkling with a deep blue stone like the night sky. There was something about the look of the stone that drew me in immediately. The seller, a woman named Karen, listed it at a very reasonable price, and without hesitation I clicked the Buy Now button. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop the next day. Karen was a middle-aged woman with a friendly smile, but in her eyes I saw something sad. As she handed the necklace to me, she slowly said, "This necklace has been in my family for many years. I hope you will cherish it." I felt there was something special in the way she looked at the necklace, as if it held a long story behind it. As soon as I picked it up, the coolness of the stone spread across my wrist, but I didn't mind. On the way home, I couldn't resist putting it on my neck. It felt like the necklace was made for me. That night, I wore it to a party with friends. Everyone commented on the strange beauty of the stone. But the strangest thing was when I got home and looked at myself in the mirror, I realized that the blue of the stone seemed even deeper and colder than before. From that day on, strange events began to occur. First, there were dreams, flickering and haunting. I found myself lost in a dark forest, with only the light from the stone to guide me. Then I heard someone whispering vaguely, as if the bracelet was calling my name. In the following days, I constantly had the feeling of being watched. When I was walking on the street, I had the feeling that people would pass by, leaving only faint traces. At night, I heard the window rattle slightly, as if someone was tapping gently, but when I turned on the light, there was only darkness and the sound of rain. One day, while I was at work, I received a text message from an unknown number. "That necklace belongs to us. Return it immediately if you want to be safe." My hands trembled as I read the message. I didn't know why, but I felt an unknown connection to the necklace, as if letting it go meant giving up a part of my soul. That night, I decided to put the necklace in a drawer and lock it, hoping to escape these haunting thoughts. But in my fitful sleep, I dreamed of the bracelet again. I found myself standing in a dark room, the sound of rain outside the window mixed with haunting whispers. Someone's shadow passed by, and for a moment I saw the cold eyes of a man, deep eyes staring at me as if knowing all the secrets I had never told. When I woke up, it was still dark. A heavy feeling weighed down on my heart. I opened the drawer, The necklace was lying there quietly, but the blue stone no longer sparkled. Instead, there was a deep black light like a bottomless pit. From that day on, I always carried the bracelet with me. Like a curse or an undeniable fate, I knew I could not be separated from this bracelet. Every time I looked at it, I felt like there was something waiting for me somewhere far away, in the darkness and the endless rain of the long night. The rain was still drizzling outside, covering everything in a misty mist, and the sound was steady like a distant whisper. The rain outside fell steadily, each drop gently hitting the window, mixing with the cold air seeping into the quiet night. I live alone in a small apartment on the 5th floor of an old building. There's a certain charm and peace to the place, something vintage that I've always been drawn to, though at times a shiver of unease crept in, especially during those quiet, shadow-filled nights. The apartment is nestled in the middle of the bustling city, but when night falls, silence wraps around everything. Only the sound of the rain outside fills the air, like whispers from a distant past. That night I was up later than usual, my eyes glued to the computer screen, the faint glow from the monitor casting a soft light over my face. As the clock struck midnight, I heard it, a soft knock on the door. Knock, knock. The sound echoed through the quiet, startling me. At first I thought it must be a neighbor, maybe someone who needed help or had the wrong apartment. But when I looked through the peephole, the hallway was empty, just a dim light from the hall casting an eerie glow over the emptiness. I stood there for a moment staring into the deserted hall, a strange feeling settling over me, as if someone was standing there hiding in the darkness. I told myself it was just my imagination, went back to my desk, and tried to shake it off. But barely a minute later, the knocking returned, this time louder, more insistent, as if someone was determined for me to open the door. Knock, knock, knock. My heart began to beat faster, a sense of dread growing inside me. The knocking continued, steady and relentless. Why me? Who would be there at this hour? Summoning all the courage I had, I stepped to the door, gripping the handle tightly, and opened it in one swift motion. But once again, the hallway was empty, just the faint light and the soft patter of rain. I closed the door, trying not to think about it, telling myself I was just anxious. Yet the unsettling feeling of being watched lingered, following me through the night. For the next few nights, at exactly midnight, the knocking returned. First it was gentle, but with each night it grew louder, more desperate. I grew afraid, refusing to open the door again, but the knocking wouldn't stop. Knock, knock, knock. I lay in bed, heart pounding, listening to each knock, as if someone was patiently waiting on the other side of the door. One night I decided to stand quietly by the door, pressing my ear against it to listen. When the knocking came again, I crouched down, peering through the gap beneath the door. Everything outside was dark still, but then I saw it, a hand, a pale, thin hand with bony fingers slowly tapping against the door, as if trying to convey some message. I froze, a wave of cold fear flooding over me, unable to breathe. The hand continued knocking, rhythmic and unyielding. I knew that if I opened the door, something dreadful would happen. Overcome with curiosity and fear, I decided to dig into the apartment's past. After speaking to a few older neighbors, I discovered that the apartment once belonged to an elderly woman who lived alone. Every night, she would stand outside her door, knocking softly, hoping someone would come to help her. But no one ever did. And on her last night, she died there, trying to call out for help. The story sent chills down my spine, and I suddenly realized the hand I had seen through the door's gap was likely hers, still waiting for someone to open the door and let her in. That night, I sat on the floor in front of my door, determined to face my fear. At the stroke of midnight, the knocking returned, gentle yet unmistakable. I took a deep breath, placed my hand on the door handle, and opened it. In front of me stood an elderly woman, her silver hair draped over her shoulders, her face pale, and her eyes sunken with sorrow, staring deep into my own. A wave of cold washed over me as I felt time stop in that moment. Without thinking, I screamed, and in that instant, she began to fade, slowly vanishing into a cold gust of wind that swept through the doorway. From that night on, the knocking ceased. But each time I hear the rain tapping against the window, I remember the lonely figure of that woman and wonder if she finally found the peace she had been longing for. The rain continues outside, a steady rhythm like the solitude and memories of restless spirits still wandering, yearning for rest. It was still raining lightly outside, each drop creating a rhythmic soundtrack to the story of a strange and haunting experience. I had just moved to Chicago and rented a small house in the suburbs. It was an old house, but its charming architecture and quiet surroundings filled me with a sense of peace and fascination. I'd always loved homes with history, places that carry the marks of time. But after only a few nights in this house, I realized it held more than just beautiful memories. Something else lingered here, something I couldn't explain. On the first night, after finishing unpacking, I went to bed early, exhausted. Just as I was drifting off to sleep, I woke suddenly to an unusual sound. Laughter, a soft, faint giggle, echoed from somewhere below, directly under my bed. It sounded like a child's laughter, light and innocent, yet oddly distant. Immediately, a chill ran down my spine. I lay there, motionless, convincing myself it must have been a sound from outside, or perhaps my imagination. But the uneasy feeling didn't fade. I lay still, staring up at the ceiling, straining to hear. The laughter returned, small and intermittent, as if two children were playing somewhere in the darkness. I squeezed my eyes shut, telling myself everything was fine, but deep down a sense of unease crept up, keeping me from falling back asleep. The next night I resolved to ignore it, determined to move past whatever had unsettled me. But just as I was about to turn off the light right on schedule, the sound returned, clearer this time, as if someone was standing in the basement directly below me. The next night I resolved to ignore it, determined to move past whatever had unsettled me. But just as I was about to turn off the light right on schedule, the sound returned, clearer this time, as if someone was standing in the basement directly below me. The fear was overwhelming, yet I couldn't let it control me. On the third night, as the laughter once again filled the silence, I decided I'd had enough. I grabbed a flashlight and headed to the basement to confront whatever was down there. My hand shook as I held the flashlight, its beam barely piercing the darkness. Descending each step, I felt the temperature drop, the air growing colder and heavier with each footfall. A part of me knew I shouldn't be here, but curiosity and determination pushed me forward. I scanned the dark basement, swinging the light into every corner. Finally, the beam landed on an old, dusty photo album tucked away in a corner. I picked it up slowly, my heart racing. My fingers trembled as I turned the pages, seeing photos of a family, a man, a woman, and two children, a boy and a girl. Both children were smiling, but their eyes held a strange emptiness, distant and hollow, as if something had left those eyes long ago. Just as I was about to set the album down, I heard it, a soft giggle coming from right behind me. Instantly I froze, my entire body stiffening as my heart seemed to stop. My flashlight wobbled as I turned around, the light sweeping over the empty darkness. There was no one there, yet the sensation of being watched was palpable, heavy, as though someone was standing inches away waiting for me to notice them. I tried to remain calm, but my legs felt weak, paralyzed by a fear that gripped me completely. At that moment, only one thought filled my mind. I needed to get out of that basement now. I hurried up the stairs, each step echoing loudly in the empty space. Just as I reached the top and shut the door behind me, the laughter sounded again from below. Ha ha ha. It was clear, close, and filled with an unsettling playfulness, as though two children were playing in the shadows right beneath me. Since that night, I haven't dared to go back down to the basement. Yet every night when the house falls silent, the laughter returns, steady and haunting. I don't know what happened to the two children in those photographs, but I can feel their presence. It's as if they are still here, playing, laughing softly from the basement, and they have no intention of leaving. I want to leave this house, but I feel trapped by my own fear. Each time I hear that laughter drifting up from the basement, I wonder, is it simply an echo from the past? Or are there spirits wandering here, waiting for someone to listen to their laughter? The laughter of souls who have never found peace. Outside, the rain fell steadily, each drop pattering on the leaves and soft ground. In the dim forest under the dense canopy, an uneasy story began to unfold. I should have known better than to trust strangers in the woods. But when you've been hiking alone for days, a friendly face can feel like a godsend. That's what I told myself when I met them, 4 locals with easy smiles and an incredible spot they wanted to show me. I never imagined those smiles would be the last friendly expressions I'd see before my world turned upside down. The Appalachian Trail had been my escape, my chance to clear my mind after a messy breakup and an even messier job loss. After 3 days on my feet, my backpack felt heavier with each step, but my mind was finally beginning to feel lighter. The rhythmic crunch of leaves beneath my boots and the soft whispers of the wind through the trees became a soothing melody, quieting the noise of my troubled thoughts. I was at a trail junction checking my map when I heard voices approaching. 2 men and 2 women rounded the corner, laughing and chatting like old friends on a casual walk. They looked like locals, flannel shirts, worn jeans, and the easy confidence of people who knew the land. The oldest, a man with salt and pepper hair and crow's feet around his eyes, waved at me with a warm smile. "Hey there, hiker. Taking on the AT all by yourself, huh?" His voice held a southern drawl that added warmth to his words. I nodded, surprised at how long it had been since I'd spoken to anyone. "Yeah, just me and the trail." The man introduced himself as Ray and quickly pointed out the others, Mike, Sarah, and Lisa. We chatted a bit, with them asking about my hike and me answering politely. It felt normal, natural, even pleasant to be talking with people again. Ray leaned in with a conspiratorial smile. "You know," he said, "if you're looking for a truly breathtaking view, we know a spot just off the trail. It's not on any map, so most hikers miss it." I hesitated. Every instinct told me to stick to the marked trail, to avoid wandering off with strangers in the forest. But they seemed genuine, eager to share their local knowledge. Wasn't that what hiking was about? Exploring hidden gems and experiencing nature off the beaten path? Sarah's eyes sparkled. "It's maybe half an hour away, but the view over the valley is incredible this time of year, with all the leaves changing." Before I knew it, I'd agreed, nodding along. "All right, why not? Lead the way." We left the well-worn path behind, Ray leading with Mike, Sarah, and Lisa, forming a loose circle around me, chatting amicably about the history of the area, pointing out interesting plants along the way. At first, we followed a faint trail, barely more than a game trail. But as we went deeper, even that disappeared, leaving us surrounded by thickening woods. The further we walked, the darker the forest grew. The canopy above blocked out more and more of the fading daylight, and the group's friendly conversation slowly dwindled into silence, replaced by the steady rhythm of our footsteps and the occasional snap of a twig. I tried to keep track of our path, but every tree began to look the same, and I lost all sense of direction. A nagging feeling grew in the pit of my stomach, whispering that something was wrong. Half an hour turned into nearly an hour, the ground becoming steeper and the underbrush thicker, forcing me to push aside branches that seemed to snag at my clothes. My legs burned from the strain. "How much further?" I asked, trying to mask the worry in my voice. Ray glanced back at me, the warmth in his expression replaced with something harder, almost calculating. "Not much longer now. You're not getting tired, are you?" His voice carried a hint of mockery, sending a chill down my spine. I forced a smile. "No, just curious." But my anxiety grew as the group around me shifted, subtly closing in. Every time I slowed or changed direction, one of them would be there, subtly hurting me along. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I was being corralled. My heart began to race, and a cold sweat formed on my brow despite the cool air. I tried to calm myself, to rationalize the situation. Maybe I was just being paranoid. Maybe this secret spot was just around the next bend. But when we emerged into a small clearing, I knew in my bones I'd made a terrible mistake. There was no breathtaking view, no valley spread out before us, just an unremarkable patch of land surrounded by dense trees, a lonely, isolated space. Ray stopped and turned to face me, the others forming a tight circle, cutting off any path to escape. "Well," he said, his voice losing any pretense of friendliness. "Here we are." I turned, searching for a gap, an opening, but found none. They'd positioned themselves perfectly, blocking any way out. My voice shook despite my best efforts to sound strong. "Where's the view you promised?" Mike, who had barely spoken the entire walk, chuckled, low and dark. "Oh, there's a view all right, just not the one you were expecting." Sarah stepped closer, the warmth in her eyes replaced by a predatory gleam. "You really shouldn't have come with us," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. But then, they never do know better. My mind raced, trying to piece together what was happening, what they wanted. The weight of my backpack suddenly felt suffocating, and I shrugged it off, ready to run at the first sign of an opening. "Listen," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "I don't want any trouble, just let me go and I'll forget this ever happened." Ray stepped forward, closing the distance between us. He was close enough now that I could smell his breath, a mix of coffee and something metallic. He leaned in, his voice low and menacing. "Trouble found you the moment you stepped off that trail." In that instant, I knew I had to act or die. With a surge of adrenaline, I swung my backpack as hard as I could, hitting Ray square in the chest. He stumbled back, surprise replacing the smug look on his face. I didn't wait to see their reactions. I turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush, heedless of Ray, direction or stealth. Branches whipped against my face. Roots threatened to trip me, but I kept moving. My only thought to put as much distance between myself and them as possible. Behind me, I heard shouts and the sound of footsteps pounding after me. They knew these woods. They had the advantage of numbers, but I had the desperate energy of someone fighting for their life. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like lead, until the sounds of pursuit faded into the rain-drenched woods. The forest all looked the same, endless trees and tangled undergrowth with no sign of the trail. As the adrenaline wore off, panic set in. I was lost, alone, with no supplies and no idea which direction led to safety. For all I knew, I'd run deeper into their territory. The sun was setting, shadows lengthening as the forest grew darker by the minute. I knew I couldn't keep running blindly. I needed shelter, somewhere to hide and catch my breath. A fallen tree caught my eye, its massive trunk and upturned roots forming a natural hollow. I crawled into the space, pulling branches around me for cover, listening to the rain tapping steadily above, blending with the racing thud of my heartbeat. I stayed hidden, drenched and shivering, waiting for dawn and praying the rain would mask my trail. In the early hours of the morning, I finally emerged, exhausted and wary, guided only by the faint glow of dawn breaking through the trees. The forest that had once offered me peace was now a place of terror I'd never forget. I stumbled through the woods until, by sheer luck, I found my way back to the trail. I've never looked back, but even now the sound of rain reminds me of that night in the forest, of false smiles and twisted intentions, and of the danger lurking just off the beaten path.
I grew up in a rural part of Oregon. There wasn't much to do there, just trees, fields, and a lot of alone time. If you liked nature and solitude, it was the perfect place. As for me, I didn't hate the countryside, but if I had the choice, I'd rather live closer to a big city. So the moment I had a car and some savings, I left. My parents sold the property about 5 years ago, so they don't own it anymore. But even now, I still feel haunted by something that happened there when I was 13 years old. The property was about 3 acres, with a pretty large house and a storage shed out back. My parents trusted me enough to leave me home alone at that age. I was responsible and even helped take care of the place. That day, it was the weekend, and I was playing Vice City on my PS2 in the living room when suddenly I heard a loud metallic bang from outside. It sounded like metal crashing against metal, echoing across the yard. Immediately, I ran to every window to see what caused the noise. I didn't see anything unusual until I got to the window overlooking the storage shed out back. The door to it was wide open. My heart pounded in my chest. I ran to my room, grabbed the rifle from the closet, and went outside. I yelled, "Who's in there?" But there was no answer. As I got closer to the shed, I shouted again, letting them know I had a gun. Inside, the shed was packed with all sorts of things: a lawnmower, an ATV, and countless gardening tools. Someone could easily hide behind any of it. Usually, I wasn't easily scared, but at that moment, a deep unease washed over me. I realized I couldn't be sure if someone was hiding there, and I wasn't feeling brave enough to confront anyone. So, I quickly shut the shed door, went back inside, and locked the door. I sat by the window, watching the shed, expecting the door to open at any second. The door was heavy. There was no way it could have just opened on its own. Someone had definitely opened it, but whether they were still in there, I wasn't sure. Not knowing what else to do, I went to the kitchen to grab the landline and called my dad. He didn't pick up, so I left him a message. I went back to the window, still keeping an eye on the shed. To calm myself, I turned on the TV for background noise, keeping the phone with me. I was about to give up watching when suddenly I heard footsteps coming from upstairs. My heart practically stopped. Was it real, or was I just scaring myself? Even though I didn't particularly love that place, it was still my home, my family's property, and I felt a responsibility to protect it. I grabbed the rifle again and silently made my way upstairs, not wanting to alert anyone if they were there. At the top of the stairs, I turned on the hallway light. There were 5 doors up there, 4 bedrooms and a bathroom. I remembered hearing the creak from the direction of my parents' bedroom, so I crouched down and looked through the crack under the door. What I saw made my stomach twist into a knot. 2 bare feet facing away from the door. That's when it hit me. Someone was actually in the house. Terror washed over me as I realized I wasn't prepared to confront, let alone threaten anyone. I bolted back downstairs, went straight to the bathroom, and locked the door. I tried calling my dad again and again, but he still didn't pick up. Finally, I dialed 911 and whispered the situation to the operator. She told me to stay put in the bathroom and keep quiet. Then, I heard footsteps coming down the stairs, heading straight toward the bathroom. They stopped right outside the door. I held my breath, every nerve on edge. After a few seconds, a deep voice said, "What's up, kid?" Those words and that voice are still seared into my memory. If I heard it today, I'd recognize it instantly. I was terrified, almost on the verge of tears. Ignoring the operator's advice, I yelled out, "I'm on the phone with the cops, and I have a gun." I put the operator on speaker so she could continue talking. The man tried the doorknob, but when he realized it was locked, he walked away. I heard his footsteps fade, followed by the sound of a door slamming. It sounded like the back door. When the police arrived, I felt like a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders. They thoroughly searched the house, inside and out, and confirmed that the intruder was gone. They asked if I had somewhere else to stay that night, and I told them I could go to my uncle's. We called him, and he came over to speak with the police before taking me back with him. What haunts me the most is realizing it was my fault. When I went outside to check the shed, I hadn't locked the back door, and that's how the man must have slipped inside. Even with a rifle in my hands, I'd never felt so powerless. It was, without a doubt, the most terrifying experience of my life. Apartment No. 13. My name is Emily. I recently moved to New York after landing a new job. Finding a decent place to live in this city isn't easy, but I was lucky to find a small apartment in Brooklyn on the 4th floor of an old building. It was apartment 13. At first, I hesitated because the number 13 reminded me of bad luck, but the location was convenient, the rent was affordable, and I didn't want to pass up such a good opportunity. When I went to pick up the keys, the landlord, an old man with a mysterious air about him, silver hair, and deep, shadowed eyes, looked at me for a long time. He hesitated before saying, "Miss Emily, be careful. This apartment, it has things that not everyone wants to face." I paused, a bit taken aback, but brushed it off, thinking he was just superstitious. I smiled, nodded, took the key, and walked into my new home. On my first night, after unpacking and showering, I fell asleep almost immediately. But right as the clock struck midnight, I woke up suddenly, feeling an odd sensation in the air. The room was completely silent, so still it felt oppressive. Then I heard a soft knock from the living room door. Tap, tap. I sat up, staring toward the door. The knock was light, steady, each tap echoing in the darkness. I tried to convince myself it was just the wind or noise from a neighbor, but my heart started pounding. A part of me felt uneasy, but I forced myself to lie back down and tried to sleep. The next night, right at the same hour, I was woken up by the knocking again. This time, it was louder, more distinct, as if someone were standing on the other side of the door, persistently knocking at a slow, deliberate pace. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I went to speak with the building manager, a middle-aged man who'd worked there for over 20 years. When I mentioned apartment 13, he gave me a complicated look. Then, after a long pause, he told me the story of that apartment. It had once belonged to a woman named Linda, a quiet, reclusive person who rarely left and always seemed sad. Neighbors hardly ever saw her smile, and sometimes they would catch glimpses of her sitting by the window, her face expressionless, eyes empty and sorrowful. Linda struggled with severe depression, and one day she simply stopped appearing. No one knew what happened to her, and no clues were left behind. Rumor had it that Linda had never really left the apartment, that her despair lingered in that space. A chill ran down my spine as I listened to his story. Part of me wanted to believe it was just a rumor, but that night I was woken again. Right at midnight, the knocking started once more. This time there was also a faint voice, quiet, frail. I pressed my ear close to the door, listening intently. And then I heard it, a soft whisper, filled with pain. "Don't leave me. Please. I don't want to be alone." My entire body went cold, rooted to the spot. The voice was faint, but filled with such sorrow, as if Linda were standing just beyond the door, pleading for help. Part of me wanted to open the door immediately, but fear held me back. I stood frozen, listening to each knock and each heartbreaking whisper, too afraid to act. The next morning, I decided I had to leave the apartment. I couldn't take it anymore. But as I packed up my belongings, I accidentally glanced into the mirror hanging on the wall. For a moment, I saw the reflection of a woman standing behind me. She had long, tangled hair, and her eyes were clouded and empty. She was standing there, watching me through the mirror, her expression filled with sadness and disappointment, as if trying to convey something unspeakable. Terrified, I screamed and ran out of the apartment, never to return. But even in the nights that followed, I could still hear that faint knocking in my dreams, a sound echoing from far away. The knock of a lonely woman still wandering in apartment 13, forever waiting for someone to release her from an endless, haunting sorrow. Laughter in the basement. I had just moved to Chicago and rented a small house in the suburbs. The house was old, but its quiet, vintage charm made me feel safe and even a bit excited. I've always loved houses with history, places that hold the traces of time. But just a few nights into living here, I began to realize that this house held more than just beautiful memories. There was something here that I couldn't quite explain. On the first night, after finishing up with the unpacking, I went to bed early because I was exhausted. I was deep asleep when I suddenly woke up. It was the middle of the night, and I heard a strange sound and laughter. It was very faint, very light, coming from somewhere beneath me, almost directly below where I lay. It sounded like the laughter of a child, innocent yet hauntingly distant. Instantly, a chill ran down my spine. I stayed still, trying to convince myself that it was just an echo from outside, or maybe my imagination. But that eerie feeling wouldn't go away. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening carefully. The laughter came again, soft and intermittent, like two children playing in the darkness. I closed my eyes tight, telling myself everything was fine. But deep down, an unshakable dread began to rise, making it impossible to sleep. The next night, I decided not to let the laughter bother me. But just as I was about to turn off the lights, right at the same time, the sound returned, even clearer this time. as if someone were standing in the basement right beneath me. The laughter was still lighthearted, but had an unsettling, almost taunting quality. My heart raced, and I clutched my blanket tightly, feeling overwhelmed by fear. Why would there be children laughing at this hour, in a house where I was the only occupant? The fear gripped me, but I couldn't let this continue. On the third night, when the laughter began again at the same time, I decided to go down to the basement and see what was going on. Holding a flashlight in my shaking hand, I made my way down, its dim beam casting eerie shadows in the dark. As I descended each step, the air grew colder, and an intense silence blanketed the space, filling it with a chilling tension. It felt like I shouldn't be there, but curiosity and determination kept pushing me forward. I scanned the basement with the flashlight, checking every corner. And then the light landed on an old, dusty photo album lying in the far corner. I picked it up cautiously, my fingers trembling as I flipped through the pages. There were pictures of a family, a man, a woman, and 2 children, a boy and a girl. Both children were smiling, but their eyes seemed empty, distant, as if something vital had long since left their gaze. Just as I was about to put the album down, a faint giggle echoed right behind me. Instantly, I froze, my heart pounding as though it would stop. My flashlight wavered as I turned around, shining it into the dark, empty space. No one was there, but I felt an intense, heavy presence as if someone was standing inches away, watching, waiting for me to turn around. Trying to stay calm, I forced myself to step back, but my legs felt weak, overwhelmed by terror. One thought flooded my mind. I needed to leave the basement immediately. I backed up the stairs, each step echoing through the empty space. As I reached the top and shut the door, the laughter began again from below. Ha ha ha. The sound was now unmistakably clear, close, and filled with a mischievous, almost playful energy, as if the 2 children were still there, laughing in the darkness right beneath me. After that night, I never went down to the basement again. But very night, as the house fell silent, the laughter would start again, haunting and relentless. I don't know what happened to the 2 children in those photos, but I could feel their presence. It seemed as if they were still here, playing, laughing in the basement, and had no intention of leaving. I want to leave this house, but it feels like I'm trapped by my own fear. Each time I hear the laughter echoing from below, I wonder, is it simply a lingering memory, or are there truly spirits wandering here, waiting for someone to hear their laughter, the laughter of souls that never found peace? The stranger in the night. I'm Anna, 18 years old, and this is my first time living alone. I recently rented a small house in suburban Texas, not far from the college I'm about to start attending. The house is at the end of a quiet street, a little secluded, surrounded by thick trees. During the day, the place feels peaceful and safe, exactly what I wanted. But when night falls and everything gets dark and quiet, I sometimes feel a little unsettled, especially when the wind blows through the trees outside the window. That night, after a long day of studying and work, I decided to get some sleep. I closed the curtains, locked the doors, and quickly drifted off, not thinking twice about anything. But around 2 am, I suddenly woke up to an unusual noise. At first, I thought it might be the branches outside brushing against the window, but it sounded different, a faint noise, like someone was moving around inside the house. I lay there, perfectly still, listening closely as my heart raced in my chest. Maybe I imagined it, I thought, trying to calm myself down. But then the noise came again, louder this time, coming from the living room. It sounded like someone was rummaging through my things, and that's when the fears set in. I knew then that I hadn't been dreaming. Despite my terror, I quietly got out of bed, grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and slowly opened my bedroom door, trying to avoid making any sound. I tiptoed down the hall toward the living room, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would give me away. When I reached the doorway, I saw a shadow in the dim light from the street outside, a tall figure moving slowly through my living room, carefully going through my drawers and cabinets like they were searching for something. I froze, holding my breath, too terrified to even move. My mind raced with questions. Why is he here? What is he looking for? And does he know I'm here? I slowly backed away, praying I wouldn't make a sound, but my foot accidentally pressed down on an old, creaky floorboard. The sound echoed through the quiet, and the figure instantly stopped. He turned his head toward me, and in the dark, I could see his eyes glint, cold and menacing. In that moment, I knew he'd spotted me. Panic overwhelmed me, and I turned and ran straight back to my bedroom, slamming the door shut and locking it as quickly as I could, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I heard his footsteps coming down the hall, slowly, one step at a time. Then he let out a strange, hissing breath, and I heard a quiet, unsettling chuckle from the other side of the door. A moment later, he started tapping on my door, softly, as if testing my patience, waiting to see if I'd give in. My heart was pounding so hard, it felt like it would burst out of my chest. In a panic, I unlocked my phone, my fingers trembling as I dialed 911. When the dispatcher answered, I whispered about my situation, struggling to keep my voice steady, hoping the police would arrive in time. The dispatcher reassured me and told me to stay as quiet as possible and not to leave my room. While I waited, I could hear him pacing outside, then the sound of scratching at the door. Slow, deliberate scratches that felt like they were clawing into my nerves. Every scratch sent chills down my spine. I wondered how long my bedroom door would hold, and whether I could stay calm as he toyed with me, knowing I was helpless behind it. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I heard sirens in the distance, getting closer. His footsteps stopped, and I heard him moving away quickly, the front door slamming shut. He was gone, but I stayed frozen in place, my entire body trembling with fear. When the police arrived and began searching the house, I came out, still shaken and trying to pull myself together. They found signs of someone going through my things in the living room and muddy footprints across the floor, but no clues about who he was or why he had chosen my house. One of the officers recommended that I install a security system and be extra careful about locking up. Though they tried to reassure me, I knew I'd never feel completely safe in this house again. I didn't sleep a wink that night. I sat on my bed, staring at the door, wondering if he would come back. Since that night, every time darkness falls, I feel like someone is watching me from the shadows. A cold, unsettling presence that hasn't gone away, and I can't help but wonder, will he come back someday? The mysterious call. My name is Emily, and I'm 18 years old. Moving into this little house on the outskirts of Washington, D.C. was a big milestone for me, exciting, yet a bit nerve-wracking. Everything felt new and free, but sometimes the silence of the house at night left me feeling alone, with a subtle hint of unease. That evening, after a long day of organizing and cleaning, I was exhausted. I finished up the last few tasks and treated myself to a cup of hot tea before heading to bed. The house was utterly quiet, with only the ticking of the clock and the soft rustling of the wind outside. It felt peaceful, almost too peaceful. I felt like, finally, I had a place of my own. As I climbed into bed and pulled the covers up to my chin, my phone suddenly rang, shattering the silence. I jolted up, my heart skipping a beat. Who would be calling this late? I glanced at the screen and saw it was an unknown number. I hesitated, but then shrugged it off, thinking it might just be a wrong number. I answered, raising the phone to my ear, and waited. There was no greeting. No one spoke. Just an extended silence stretching on and on. Nearly a full minute passed before I finally heard it, a faint breath, as though someone was standing right next to the phone, just close enough to be heard. The steady breathing made my skin crawl. I immediately hung up, telling myself it was probably just some prank call. I took a deep breath, trying to reassure myself that there was nothing to fear. But then, less than a minute later, the phone rang again, and this time, a deep uneasiness settled over me. Could it really be the same number? I wondered, my pulse quickening. Why would they call again? A bit reluctantly, I answered. This time, I heard a low, raspy voice, distant yet chillingly close, saying only, "I see you." I froze, every muscle in my body going rigid. My heart pounded faster, and a cold wave of dread washed over me. Just as I started to catch my breath, the phone rang again. I didn't want to answer, but it felt like some strange force was compelling me to pick it up. This time, that same voice came through, harsher and colder. "You can't hide from me." I instantly hung up, my hands trembling with fear. I felt as though someone was watching me, somewhere inside the house, their gaze tracking my every move. Every dark corner, every shadow seemed to hold something sinister. My cozy little house was suddenly filled with a disturbing sense of presence, as though it was no longer mine. Determined to end this, I unplugged the phone from the wall, hoping that would silence the relentless calls. But just as I was lying down, finally tucked in under the covers, the phone rang again. The sharp sound pierced through the darkness, even though it was completely unplugged. Cold sweat trickled down my back, my mind blank. unable to make sense of what was happening. Hands shaking, I picked up the phone, almost as if in a trance. The voice came again, softer now, almost a whisper, chillingly close. "I'm already here." Those words sliced through any sense of safety I never felt in that house. And then I heard a faint noise coming from the hallway. Slow, deliberate footsteps, as though someone was moving carefully toward my room. In that moment, I could swear I heard breathing just on the other side of my door, heavy and close, almost palpable through the thin wood. I was frozen, every nerve on edge, too terrified to move or even breathe. I felt as if even the smallest movement would alert whatever was out there, inviting it into my room. I couldn't take it anymore. I leapt out of bed, threw on my coat, grabbed my keys, and ran out of the house into the night, my hands shaking as I called the police. When they arrived, I recounted every detail, each part of the story etched into my memory. The officers searched every corner of the house, but found no signs of an intruder. After that night, even though the police assured me there was nothing out of the ordinary, I could never feel safe in that house again. Every night, as darkness fell, I would hear little noises from somewhere within the shadows, or feel the suffocating sensation of being watched. The eyes of the stranger, the whisper over the phone, the faint footsteps down the hall. They lingered, haunting me, waiting to terrorize me all over again. If you find my story interesting, please like and subscribe to wait for our better stories every day.